Hey everybody, my name is Travis. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. I'm 28 years old. I'm currently a student taking up information technology, specialization in digital investigations. Um, I'm also an atheist. I just became an atheist about almost 3 years ago now. And I decided to do this video series kind of explaining why I became an atheist. And the reason why I'm doing this is because there are plenty of YouTubers who are atheists who do great videos, but there's only a few black people who do them. And there's this old, belief that black people don't do atheism, which is a complete myth. There have always been black atheists. Obviously, atheists are overwhelmingly white, however, but there have been black atheists such as Frederick Douglass, Langston Hughes, James Baldwin, and the list goes on and on. Butterfly McQueen. Uh, And so I decided to speak up and join those few black atheists that are on YouTube with the video series of my own about being black and being an atheist, which is similar to a lot of white people's experiences, but also very different from white people's experiences and with atheism and the discrimination that comes with it. So, hope that after doing this series, more black atheists will speak up and join the party, so to speak, and explain to us why they're atheists and their thoughts on religion and being a free thinker and so on and so on. So, anyway, I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. That's where I live now. But my journey into atheism really begins in the city of Los Angeles. Um, but before that, let me give you some more background. Like I said, I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. Went to After high school, I joined the United States Navy, and really, I should say that my journey into atheism starts there, because that's when I realized, when I was in the Navy, that's when I realized that I really didn't have as firm of a belief in religion as I wanted to. So I began to rectify that problem by studying the Bible more. And the saying in the atheist community: if you want to create an atheist, hand a religious person a Bible and tell them to read the whole thing. Well, that couldn't be more true in my case. Also, there was a scientific elements to me becoming an atheist as well. So the Bible wasn't the only thing that convinced me, but it is a part of it. Anyway, back to the story. I joined the Navy in 2005. I was about to turn 19. Yeah, no, I was 19 years old. Um, I didn't know what to do with my life. I wasn't quite certain what I wanted to do. And so I decided to go into the military. I can learn skills all throughout my 4 years there and also get free education benefits. And so that was enough to entice me to join. So I signed a 4-year contract and went to boot camp in September of 2005. By 2006, January 2006, I was at my first duty station. It was Naval Air Station Lemoore, California. Um, I met a lot of people there, both religious, some not so religious, not necessarily atheists, but not so religious. I only met two actual atheists while I was in the military that entire time. Um, but as I began to study the Bible more, that's when I met the first atheist that I met. He and I were on a work detail together, and the subject of the religion came up. It was a lot of us in the room, and we were waiting for our next thing to do, and the subject of religion somehow came up. I don't know how, but it did. And he was the only atheist, committed atheist in the room. Everyone else was either religious or had a religious background, and like I said before, maybe they were lapsed Christian, but pretty everyone in the room was pretty much Christian. And I asked him flat out, why did you become an atheist, and he began telling me all these things that I just couldn't believe at the time. About God ordering the deaths of people, ordering the killing of babies. I mean, I knew the story of the firstborn in Egypt. That's the story. That's the story that's preached about. But at least in my case, I never heard preaching about him, sending the Israelites into different lands, killing every man, woman, and child, and taking the virgins that were left over and essentially forcing them into marriage with you, with them rather. And that was the first time I heard things like that. I had never, because being from the South, it's very seldom you hear anybody talk crap about religion. Religion is second only to football in the South. So it was pretty amazing to me to hear someone express such a negative opinion about God and about the Bible and about religion in general. Um, but I explained to him why I was a Christian and how I believe religion could be good for society if it was done right. Obviously, I was more liberal than conservative with my Christianity. I didn't believe in, you know, punishing gay people for simply being themselves. I supported gay marriage. I supported a woman. I didn't support abortion at that time, but that's another story for later. But he started saying all these things, such as if God saying things that, like I said, I would never imagine anyone saying here in the South, saying that God wasn't really an intelligent force, that God shows signs of being less than intelligent than we are, and a lot of things that would just make my Southern born and raised grandmother go pass out on the floor. But I was still friends with him. He was a great guy. We just disagreed at that time on religion. But after that conversation, and after he pointed out these things, he also pointed out about slavery being supported by the Bible. He also talked about uh, the situation with women and rape in the Bible, and I knew the Bible said in Corinthians that a woman was to be silent in the church, but I had no clue that a woman who was raped in biblical times, if the rapist is caught raping you, he has to pay the woman's father 50 shekels and marry the woman. I didn't know that. So after that night when I went to sleep, I couldn't sleep, really. I tried to, but I couldn't get it out of my head that that's how this guy felt. And I couldn't get it out of my head that all these things he pointed out actually were in the Bible. And I wondered to myself, how come no one had ever talked to me about that before? I began to wonder if my mother knew or if my father knew, or did my two sisters know, and I I just couldn't believe that those things were there. I was shocked. But I kind of shrugged it off after a few days and kept on going and saying, well, there has to be a reason as to why God did those things. And I hate to admit, I was basically rationalizing it to myself, which is probably what most people do who, if they do know those things are in the Bible. You have to, right? In order to keep believing, either you have to rationalize it or you can take the liberal route and say, well, um, that part of the Bible wasn't inspired by God. That was inspired by mankind, and the messages of love and kindness are the real words of God. But of course, you have no way of proving or disproving that, and so it's not really a legitimate position to take. Um, but anyway, that was my first encounter with an atheist. My next encounter with an atheist, well, I wasn't really with her, but I knew of her. I knew about her being an atheist from other people. And other people would say horrible things about her because she was an atheist. And I really, really was taken aback by that. Because even though I disagreed, I certainly didn't think anyone deserved to be bashed for not believing the same thing that I believed in. That is just not the American way. And as a part of the military and being a part of the U.S. Navy for those 4 years, definitely taught me that there are Americans of all shapes and sizes and beliefs and ideas. And anyone who lays their life on the line for their country should be treated with respect. I don't care if you have a difference of opinion about something, about a subject as polarizing as religion. Um, but hey, anyway, that got me thinking about Christianity and how it seems to allow you to be so mean and dastardly towards other people who have different beliefs from you. And it's absolutely appalling. But that is what the holy books say, right? All holy books say that you must treat the other side like crap. Yeah. I mean, it's a contradiction, obviously, from within that context, because all three of the monotheistic religions also teach you to love and care for other people. But then it turns around and says, well, except for those who don't believe like you. And I couldn't be more appalled at that when I realized that. But anyway, fast forward, I leave the Navy in 2009 and I moved to Los Angeles. I started attending the Los Angeles Film School there in Hollywood, California, and had my apartment and everything. And this is when I really got exposed to different ideas. You know, obviously it's California, LA especially is pretty liberal, um, but it's also very non-judgmental of a place as well. And even though I was a Christian, I was made to feel welcome. There was no mad atheists going around chopping people's heads off for being religious or anything like that. Um, and certainly there were other Christians who were like me, who were carefree. We loved God. We thought God was awesome. If you didn't believe in Him, that's okay. You're still my buddy. And that's the type of atmosphere that I was in there, and I enjoyed that atmosphere very much. This very non-judgmental atmosphere. Um, but then things kind of went downhill. Um, Recently, a couple of years ago, right before I came home to Memphis, Tennessee, I was diagnosed with a mental illness. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. I won't go into what schizophrenia is. I think most people know the main, um, the main points of schizophrenia, things like that. And it really made me suffer, mainly because I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what was going on with me. And I was really afraid to tell anybody about it. Which, come to find out is the case with a lot of people who have mental illness. Go untreated because they are too scared to report it. But anyway, I digress. The point that I'm making is that I had to leave the school after that. And I ended up homeless, basically, because I just wasn't in my right mind. I wasn't in my right mind, and I was paranoid of telling anybody what was going on with me. And so I slept on the streets for about a couple of months until my paranoia got so bad that I ended up finally going to the VA hospital and checking myself in to the mental ward. I spent almost 3 months there until I spent quite some time there until it was time for me to finally go home and my mother and grandmother arranged for me to get home, and I got home. Thank goodness for them. And I began the healing process of really recovering from my psychotic breakdown. After my psychotic breakdown, I began to realize something. I began to realize that my prayers to God all that time. Well, there was two ways I can look at it. Let me put it this way. There was two ways I can look at it. I could say, well, um, God answered my prayers in time, or I can say that God didn't answer my prayers at all, and it was really people and doctors and my family and my friends that really got me through the trouble. And I was thinking about that for a very, very, very long time. But this wasn't the first time I began to question. Back when I was in Los Angeles before the breakdown, I was also looking for answers, and I went to many different religious establishments. Unlike what you may have heard, if you haven't been to Los Angeles and been to the Hollywood area, there are plenty of churches around. There was a Catholic church right down the street from the film school I was attending at that time, and I would ask the priest questions about God and how do I know that God is really listening or that He's really there. No one can give me a definitive answer. It always came back around to faith, which is what you'd expect from religious people because that's the mainstay of every religion, right? Is having faith that what you believe is true. And I also went to this Jewish temple. Wasn't an Orthodox synagogue, but it was a Jewish Reformed Jewish temple. But they still believed in God and things like that, and I liked their format. I attended for weeks their services, and it was always uplifting because they were a little more laxed, of course. They didn't believe in necessarily the Bible being the true inspiration of God, which is one of the reasons why Orthodox Jews kind of despise Reform Jews because they consider them essentially heretics and blasphemers. But that's another story for another day. But they had this view of God that the view that you would think would actually be a God. You know, they had the view of the God that we all wish did exist. The one that is there to help you in your time of need. The one that is going to save you because he loves you. And not that, fire and brimstone God that you get from the King James Version Bible or the uh, I come with a sword Jesus in the New Testament. But but they too couldn't give me a definitive answer either. For all of what I liked about them, they still lacked the ability to answer the big questions. Um, but I can't say this. At least nobody told me that I couldn't question. So that was a plus, I guess. But anyway, back to when I got home in Memphis, here in Memphis, I began watching documentaries on things like evolution, the Big Bang Theory. Uh, I started watching documentaries of debates between atheist and religious people. Of course, you know the big names like uh, Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and so on. Michael Shermer, and P.Z. Myers, Richard Carrier, you name it, you name them. I've seen that, seen them debate and speak, and I realized just how dishonest a lot of the Christian apologists were when debating an atheist. And What really got me thinking was watching a documentary of the about the 2007 uh, trial in Dover, Pennsylvania. The school board, the parents and teachers, or the parents sued the school board at Dover High School. Well, not at Dover High School, but in Dover School District, because they were trying to put intelligent design in the classrooms. And I couldn't help but to find the scientists who were testifying in favor of evolution being taught and not intelligent design. I couldn't help but to find them convincing. Everything they said I could look up and find, and I can confirm that what they were saying was true. And same thing with all the other documentaries that Richard Dawkins had done. And I realized that the Christians didn't have any evidence for what they were trying to claim was true. And especially fundamentalists, the Bible literalists, the ones who really believe that Noah's Ark actually happened, and that really do believe that Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by God with fire, or that a woman turned into a pillar of salt. They actually believe this stuff, and they have no evidence for it whatsoever. And they're so right when they say that faith is pretending to know something that you really don't know. That's what the Bible writers should have put, because that's the truth. I didn't know. I was hoping that I knew as a Christian that there was a heaven and a God and all that. I was also of the mind, too, of what a lot of anti evolution people believe, which is they believe the great evils of evildoers in the history of the world, such as Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong and Pol Pot and all that, were using evolution as the model for their conquests and their murders. And it couldn't be further from the truth. When you really dig deep and look at it, you find out that Adolf Hitler was raised a Catholic. You realize that he imposed Christianity in particular on students in school. He said plenty of times in his messages to the effect that he believed that he was doing the Lord's work by eliminating the Jews. He blamed the Jews for the death of Jesus, for the crucifixion of Jesus, and believed that he was sent by God to be a weapon against the Jews. And he is talking about the Christian God. And with all of that, I found it harder and harder to believe that God was there. And then I watched the documentary on evolution about Charles Darwin and how he went on this adventure for 5 years on the HMS Beagle, and he actually founded evolution. And a lot of people on the Christian side like to say that, hey, he was like to say that he wasn't, he was looking for a reason to hate Christianity or something like that because his child died. Well, his daughter didn't die until after he came back. He had already founded evolution by the time he came back and his daughter died. So that's false. And he had no reason to hate God. Charles Darwin wanted to become a priest, until he discovered that he was a naturalist. And he continued, even after discovering evolution, to be involved with the church. Not as a priest, of course. He may have stopped believing in God, But at no point did Charles Darwin try to spit on God or spit on Christians for worshiping God. He wasn't that type of person. But what really pisses me off as a black man, is that people will say that Charles Darwin was a racist and that evolution is racist. There's nothing racist about evolution, okay? Nothing. However, Christianity has been a tool for racism, starting with slavery time. It's right there in the Bible. Slaves, obey your masters. Jesus says in the New Testament, in the book of Ephesians, slaves, obey your rich masters and respect them as you would respect Christ. Yeah, no one's ever been enslaved because of evolution. No one. No one has ever been enslaved and have their slave master say, Charles Darwin says that I can enslave you because you're inferior. No, only one group of people have believed that in history, and that has been religious people who believe that their god or gods allow them to enslave other people. Plain and simple. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, these guys reject evolution because evolution screws up their plans of being superior. Because evolution eliminates the whole idea that any one person on the branches of the tree of life is more important than the other. That's just plain and simple. You can't claim superiority when you all belong to the same tree. But it pisses me off to know that there are so many black people that don't know this, that don't know about slavery in the Bible, that don't realize that slave masters were allowed to beat you nearly to death. And so long as you didn't die within the first, I think it was 1 or 2 days of your beating, they didn't get punished. And this is a rule that is set by God. This wasn't, if you believe in God, of course. Obviously, I don't believe this message actually came from a God, but let's say hypothetically that he is real. He gave slave masters permission to beat our ancestors. When the slave master put a slave on the whipping post and whipped them, it was with the permission of the supposed all-loving, all-good God that our preachers preach to us about each and every Sunday. And as a decent person that cares about human beings, that cares what happens to the human race in the future, I could no longer believe the so-called word of God. I just couldn't. I just couldn't. Well, I'm going to end this here. It's going on kind of longer than I thought I was going to do. But I do appreciate you all listening. This is just the first day of this, by the way. I'm going to come back maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. I'll figure out the timeline. But I've got a lot more to explain. I got a lot more to put out there. So, hey, if you like this video, let me know. If you thought it was boring, let me know. Whatever, Next video, I'll get more into being black and an atheist and what I think it means for black people and how I think religion has actually been bad for black people. So until then, thanks a lot. Again, my name is Travis. Yeah, share your thoughts and comments with me. Peace.